Hello, and welcome to our program Where God Weeps. Today we're going to be speaking about the country of Lithuania, one of the largest and most populous of the Baltic states, with a population of about 3.4 million. Lithuania is generally considered to be a maritime country, with over 60 miles of beautiful sandy beaches. The Lithuanian people are neither Slav nor Germanic, although they have been impressed and touched by the union with Poland and then later their annexation by Germany and then the Soviet Union. Lithuania was the last country in Europe to be baptized in 1387, and still today more than 80% of the population consider themselves to be Catholic. To tell us more about the situation of the Catholic Church in Lithuania, it's my pleasure today to welcome Mr. Marko Tomashek, Section Head for Eastern Europe for the international Catholic charity Aid to the Church in Need. Marko, thank you for being with us here today.
My pleasure.
Marko, it's been 15 years since the collapse of communism, and yet Lithuania is still deeply imprinted with the footprint of communism. How did the Church suffer under communism in Lithuania?
Yeah, well, the Lithuanians didn't choose militant atheism for themselves. You know, it came when the country was overrun by Soviet Russia at the end of World War II, and because militant atheism and communism was the official doctrine in Russia, it was imposed on Lithuania. So the Catholic identity of Lithuanians set them apart from the Soviet Empire, and it meant that they didn't really fit in as they were. So what Stalin did was to deport thousands of Lithuanians to Siberia to break their resolve. And there, of course, they were far away from their churches and whatever. And back at home, the church was, well, it wasn't completely eradicated, but it was reduced to a very sort of minimal operation where, the few parish priests that were allowed could say, their Sunday masses, but there was no permission to work with children, there was no access to public life. So that meant that in time the church was unable to really form and educate its faithful as it had been for the previous centuries. So the contact with the people was slowly lost, and that meant a lot of people de facto became ignorant of their Christian traditions. There was always a group of people who were activists, and they were active, but often it was sort of a half underground thing. We had the famous Lithuanians who kept up the chronicle of the Lithuanian Church. And they did have one seminary, which was able to work throughout the entire Soviet period. But of course, it was controlled by the KGB as an official instrument. So that was more or less the state of life in Lithuania.
Churches were turned into warehouses.
Some, not all, but a great majority.
And a lot of the priests, did we have the same thing as, for example, in other countries where priests were obliged to become agents of the KGB?
They were not obliged, but the KGB tried to get as many as they could to work for them. It depended on the individual priest. There were a lot that remained steadfast. There might have been some that couldn't bear the pressure and did cooperate. But in general, the Lithuanian Church put up a heroic struggle, and we see the fruits of it today.
Now, Lithuania, although it's lesser known, was as much a pebble in the communist shoe as Poland. What did Lithuania contribute to the downfall of communism?
Well, there are people who would say that Stalin made two mistakes. That means that he incorporated Lithuania and Western Ukraine into the Soviet Union, which weren't part of the Soviet Union prior to that. And because of the sort of strong Catholic identity of these regions, the people had a source of identity which Stalin couldn't and the communists couldn't take away from them, and it was based on the Catholic faith. It gave them an identity as Lithuanians, and it gave them also a notion of human dignity that gave them an inner strength to resist the system. And even in the 1950s, if you know about these things, there were uprisings organized in the prisons in Siberia, and they were organized by Lithuanians and Ukrainians, and probably Catholics. So in that sense, there was an ideological or a spiritual source of resistance which they were unable to conquer.
Pope Benedict, in his ad limina visit with the Lithuanian bishops in 2006 said that the Lithuanians have not yet, or Lithuania as a country has not yet been healed of the wounds imposed on it by communism. What are these wounds that Lithuania still carries today?
Well, I think I don't know what the Pope meant exactly. Only the Pope might know that, but you can speculate. There are the wounds that happen to people when their faith is taken away from them. There are sort of ancient traditions and culture which are very Christian. Now, if that's just taken away by force and you are left to sort of a godlessness, that brings with it an apathy. You lose responsibility. You accommodate to a system that's based on deceit, violence, and lies. You don't care for your neighbor as much. You're not prone to be honest. All these values were taken away from them. And it's much easier to sack Rome in a day, but it's impossible to build it. So to rebuild all of this, it's going to take a lot more time. But there are also the wounds of the people who are persecuted. Maybe the Pope even meant that in the noble spiritual sense. The wound, you are wounded until you are able to forgive your oppressor. Learning forgiveness to those who did you injustice and persecuted you. Maybe that still hasn't been solved, and even part of the strategy of communism was also to play people off against each other, people informed on one another, and until that is overcome, you have to be able to forgive and accept forgiveness. So maybe that's the process that's still not finished in Lithuania.
Lithuania today is still known as the land of crosses. Where did it receive this name, and why is it still carried on today?
Well, Lithuania is a land of forests, so even in pre-Christian times, wood carving was, a very prevalent pastime. And with the onset of Christianity, these pagan carvings became Christian carvings. So Lithuania is literally scattered with wooden crosses along roads, in forest paths, near springs, near lakes, at cemeteries, and also in private homes. And it's due to this big prevalence of crosses in the country that the country got the name Land of Crosses.
Marko, we're going to take a break and we're going to watch a small documentary which is going to give us a bit more of an insight into the situation of Catholics in Lithuania, Catholics in this land of crosses.
There are many legends describing how the first crosses appeared on this hill, which local people named the Hill of Crosses. Historical evidence, though, dates the very first crosses after the years 1830 and 1863, following two important uprisings of the Lithuanian nation against the Russian annexations. From then on, it seems as if the whole of Lithuanian history has converged in this hill. The Lithuanians responded with hammer and chisel to the Soviet hammer and sickle. The Hill of Crosses became a regular meeting place for these groups. Formerly dangerous, today a meeting with a guardian of order can be a very polite and friendly conversation. We visited one in this house where no address is shown.
Yes, we patrolled the Hill of Crosses. However, we never fully realized the reasons behind it. We were on patrol, but we did not direct the action. We executed orders. We only did what we were ordered by the Interior Ministry, or more often, the KGB. It was they that told us what to do. Reactionary tactics intensified in the last 5 years of Brezhnev's rule. The reason for starting the patrol was simple enough: to prevent people from building crosses, especially with anti-Soviet inscriptions, for religious holidays or some other memorable dates linked with Lithuania's statehood, such as February 16th, Lithuanian Independence Day. I carried 3 crosses. I took the first one from Sodis, where I was the priest for 5 parishes. I walked 60 kilometers through 5 parishes with bare, bleeding feet. It was in October, but I don't recall the year. I started at 9 p.m. After 13 hours at 10 a.m., I eventually reached the hill. I had this intention, as a priest and a believer, to ask for God's help so that our friends would leave, and my homeland would be free. The demolitions were carried out over a long period, between 1960 and 1977. Local communist activists from Šiauliai planned to destroy the monument. Bulldozers were used to pull down the crosses. They were taken to Soviet military bases and burned. Incredibly, new crosses would appear the same night. If not for the Soviet demolitions, I might not have built another cross. I'm not sure about that. But when they started to pull them down, it created a wave of opposition among believers. Most of the cross builders were among a group called the Eucharistic Friends. The people who used to build crosses were very patriotic. They took a great risk since they knew about the possible consequences. If a car drove to the Hill of Crosses, its license numbers would be recorded in special files. The owners would be found later on. There were certain repressive measures taken against such persons. Nevertheless, the people would continue to put up crosses. Not a simple cross was built without an intention. Some were erected in gratitude, others in request of something. They were built in the name of people and independence, to atone for the sins of the nation, to fight alcoholism and preserve families. We prayed as we planted the cross.
My grandson was dying, and the doctors told us that there was no hope. He had encephalitis. He was running a very high temperature, and he was already blind. I remembered the Hill of Crosses, and I said, "Lord, you will make my grandson healthy." I promised to take him there. He was only 9 months old. My grandson did not die, so I carried a cross to the hill. God heard our prayers.
Važiuodavom į talkas. Kiekvienais metais gegužės 2.
Every May 2nd, we would go there to do some cleaning work. We repaired the crosses so that they would stand as long as possible. We would celebrate a mass there, followed by a common meal. The KGB agents would be sitting in their cars, so I would take them a sandwich and a cup of coffee. "We are praying," I would say, "while you are waiting for us to finish. You must be very hungry. Treat yourself to some food. We are Catholics, and we share our meals." Then they would drive and park their cars further away.
Again, the Hill of Crosses was stripped bare. Following the last demolition in 1975, people from all over Lithuania, as well as from other neighboring countries, including Latvia and Russia, brought crosses. To avoid detection, some were floated up the Kulpe River. The residents of Šiauliai persisted in the national resistance. One center of resistance organization was the apartment of Mečislovas Jurevičius. From here, the freedom fighters carried 19 crosses to the top of the hill. One cross, 3 meters long, they carried for the forgiveness of sins of the nation and for those who destroyed the hill. It was a calm May evening, 1973. They prepared themselves for the road.
Everything seemed all right. We then came to our apartment and suddenly one of the young men said, "The KGB knows everything." My father told them. Our mood changed immediately. What shall we do? We told the young people not to go with us. But they said, "Do you think we are just princes and princesses?" Not a single person went home. All of us carried the cross.
These young people knew that as a consequence of their action, they could have been banned from their studies. As for Mečislovas, as one of the central organizers of the event, the punishment could go even further, to Siberia. He was only too aware of the significance, having already spent 6 years in a labor camp. Eventually, he would be sentenced for another 3 years.
You performed great deeds. Do you feel like a hero? I don't feel that I've done something special as a Lithuanian and Catholic. Sometimes, when I am alone, I wonder where my strength came from. For example, in labor camps, the body is locked, but the spirit remains free. You have more time to meditate. You still have your prayers. I never prayed so fervently as in the detention ward.
Ladies and gentlemen, we've just seen a small documentary on Lithuania, the land of crosses, and the role that this small hill of crosses played in the history of Lithuania. It's my pleasure to talk with Marko Tomashek, who's telling us a little bit about the situation of Lithuania and the role of Catholics in Lithuania. Marko, can you tell us what was so special about this hill? Why was it so significant in Lithuania?
Well, in the 18th century, when there were the peasant uprisings in Lithuania, they started to bring a lot of crosses to this particular hill, and it became a symbol of their defiance of foreign invaders and oppressors and whatever. And this sort of, anytime there was a sort of a critical phase in Lithuanian history, this sort of would increase. Now the people would pilgrim there, visit the site, and leave a cross there, whether it was in 1914, time of the First World War, 1940, the time of the Second World War, and then afterwards in Soviet times. In Soviet times, when Lithuanian identity found that didn't have any avenue to be expressed in a very open way, a lot of people could only covertly go to the Hill of Crosses and place a cross there. And it was a sign that, we are still Lithuanian, we still believe in our cross, in our Christianity. And in the initial years of Soviet rule, the hill was bulldozed 3 times. The crosses were collected, gathered, burnt, or the metal was melted down and turned into God knows what. And then the hill turned into a rubbish dump. And the people would, every time that happened, the people would come back and they would undo the sacrilege, start bringing their crosses again. And in 1985, apparently, the Soviets just gave up. And maybe that was just the first little sort of swallow, the first sign that religious freedom was nice. So that played a very important role in it was a focal point, a crystallization point for their defiance of the system and their yearning for their true Christian Lithuanian identity.
Secularization is, of course, affecting Lithuania as every other Western European nation. What is the challenge of secularization to the Church, and how is the Church responding to this new challenge of secularization?
Well, we can philosophize a little bit about secularization. If we, your initial question about persecution in Lithuania, that's when God is taken away by force. Secularization seems to have the note, we give him away of our own free will, and we don't care about him. We just care about the world. I think today our modern world has grown together. We cannot just say, there's the bad world there and the good world, the good West here, because we don't persecute by force. But what do we do to bring God into our lives? Okay, and just taking the inspiration of St. Paul. St. Paul was saying, secularization might come. You will have false teachers. You will have people who are, want to get your attention with all sorts of myths and teachings which aren't the truth. And he wasn't really panicking. He just said, just stick to it and teach the truth and evangelize. Just be patient. And with secularization, I think they can get a few tips from the experiences of the Church in the West. But after having gone through a forced atheization, I think they will somehow find the inspiration to deal with the new problem. And the people who are convinced Christians in Lithuania, they're certainly capable of following the advice of St. Paul and making a great effort to just teach the children and make it available to the population, the gospel. And I think with the grace of God and the hope of the Holy Spirit, they'll attract a lot of people to the Church.
There is a revival of pagan traditions and New Age philosophies that have also become very popular in Lithuania. Where's this coming from? What's the root of this?
Well, a lot of it's imported from the West. It's also a sign that people are looking for something, and the official Church is just unable to reach everybody immediately. But that's one reason, again, why the Church has said, how can we blame the people for not being such and such and such if we don't offer them the fullness of the faith? And what is the fullness of the faith is not something you can learn in 5 minutes. It means you have to really accompany people, offer programs to people, offer seminars, offer parish life, and they are now making a concerted effort to do this. So there's no easy answer to it. It's just that the people who are convinced that the truth is revealed in Jesus Christ as it is in the Catholic Church. They just have to go out and offer it.
Is it not a form of nationalism, these revivals of these ancient cults and traditions?
It could be seen as that. There are certain people who would say, you know, if we have our own religion, then we are different from everybody else. In that sense, it can be a form of nationalism, that you're linked to the group. And it's easy to understand that could be a temptation for people who have suffered violence from another people, that you sort of say, we have to find a God for ourselves, and it's our old pagan gods. But I think it's not such a prevalent phenomenon, although it is there, and I wouldn't like to overestimate it.
What are the priorities of aid to the Church in need for Lithuania in this new context?
Well, I'm very happy that, you know, our investment in the Lithuanian radio, the little studio, has been so successful, and a sign of its success is that after, you know, 15 years of being constantly aired on Lithuanian television, now they had or Lithuanian radio, I'm sorry, there was a competition, and it was judged to be the best cultural program in Lithuania. This means that it's through the program, the Christian message has access to all of Lithuania, and it's recognized as such. And our efforts, that's just one symbolic sign of our efforts, to support the formation process in the country, starting with the formation of priests, the religious, the laity, and even sort of the wide public through a radio program. I believe that our role in countries like Lithuania is that a church there never feels alone. That's what the Catholic family is. You're never alone. And by receiving help from us, they are inspired to become givers themselves. And just recently, the collection for the Holy Land, I heard that the Cardinal in Vilnius was surprised at how generous the people were. So the fact that you experience the generosity of others, it motivates you to be generous for other Christians in need. And it's apart from all the value of any particular project, there's sort of a spiritual value involved in all of this, and it's called solidarity.
Marko Tomashek, thank you for being with us here today and sharing your experiences. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for having been with us on our program today. And if you'd like to know more information about the Church in Lithuania or how you can help, I would encourage you to consider the contact information posted at the end of this program. And I look forward to seeing you next time on Where God Weeps.